The currency war begins in the early 21st century. Power stopped being measured by armies or oil. It shifted toward something invisible: control of money. As technology merged with finance, a new battlefield emerged: a currency war, fought not with weapons, but with code. The spark came from Washington. When former U.S. President Donald Trump announced his Bitcoin order, it sent shockwaves through the global economy. For decades, America's dominance rested on the dollar, the world's reserve currency, the backbone of global trade. But China's rise, and its state-backed digital yuan, was challenging that supremacy. Trump's move was not just economic, it was strategic, an attempt to secure U.S. power in a world turning digital. The order aimed to integrate Bitcoin into national policy, creating reserves, supporting mining, and establishing clear rules. Supporters called it visionary, America embracing innovation to protect its influence. Critics called it reckless, inviting chaos into the heart of finance. But one thing was certain: money had become a tool of geopolitics once again. Beijing responded swiftly. While the U.S. embraced decentralization, China doubled down on control. The digital yuan, or ECNY, had been years in development, programmable, traceable, and fully monitored by the state. Where Bitcoin represented freedom, the digital yuan represented order. Through it, China sought to build a financial shield against Western sanctions and a network of influence across its Belt and Road partners. Soon, the world divided into three systems of value: the U.S. dollar, symbol of institutional trust; the digital yuan, symbol of authority; and Bitcoin, symbol of independence. Each stood for a different idea of power, and each attracted its own believers. Markets reacted with chaos and wonder. Bitcoin's price soared. Gold lost relevance. Central banks rushed to launch their own digital currencies, from Europe's digital euro to Japan's digital yen. Finance was no longer unified. It had splintered into competing ecosystems: regulated, decentralized, and hybrid. Trade began to follow ideology instead of geography. Energy producers accepted Bitcoin for oil. Corporations created private tokens that blurred the line between government and business. Ordinary citizens managed wallets of mixed currencies: dollars for stability, SANY for convenience, Bitcoin for freedom. Every transaction became a political act, every balance a statement of belief. At the heart of this transformation lay the deeper struggle: decentralization versus regulation. The West trusted open systems to drive innovation and liberty. The East trusted control to guarantee order and security. Both sought prosperity. Both feared losing power. Decentralized systems empowered individuals but unleashed volatility. Regulated ones ensured safety but restricted freedom. Humanity was learning that money reflects its oldest dilemma: trust versus control. Governments tried to adapt. The U.S. invested in blockchain transparency and renewable mining. China expanded the digital yuan's reach through trade networks. International institutions like the IMF and World Bank tried to mediate, but money now moved faster than law itself. Finance had escaped politics. Algorithms had become the new diplomats. Over time, the rivals began to converge. The dollar adopted blockchain security. The yuan added limited privacy. Bitcoin evolved into a recognized digital reserve. A fragile equilibrium emerged, a world where no currency could dominate, yet none could exist alone. For everyday people, life became seamless but exposed. Payments happened instantly, but privacy vanished. Freedom was no longer a right, it was a setting written into code. Money had turned into information, and information had become power. Historians would call this the monetary renaissance, the moment humanity redefined value. To hold dollars meant trusting institutions. To hold yuan meant trusting authority. To hold Bitcoin meant trusting mathematics. Three systems, three beliefs, one interconnected world. By the 2030s, no empire ruled finance. The dollar endured, the yuan expanded, Bitcoin persisted. Nations, corporations, and individuals all competed for influence in a marketplace that never slept. Power had become digital and unstoppable. And as the world looked ahead, one truth remained. The real battle was never between currencies, but between control and freedom, between the desire to command and the courage to trust. The next chapter of this currency war will not unfold in parliaments or banks, but in algorithms, in the silent architecture that decides who can pay, who can save, and who can dream. Money is no longer what we earn. It is what defines us, and who decides that may shape the future of civilization itself. Power, trust, and the new order as the dust settled after Trump's Bitcoin order. The world realized something profound. Money was no longer a neutral tool. It had become a weapon of ideology. Well, I'm when I got the United States led the world of open markets, anchored by the dollar. Its institutions promised transparency and democracy, yet behind those ideals lay a deep fear that the era of dollar supremacy was fading. Trump's decision to embrace Bitcoin was an attempt to inject new energy into the American financial empire, to show the world that freedom and innovation still defined its core. But the experiment came with risk. How could a government control a currency that, by design, resisted control? Across the Pacific, China was building the opposite model, a financial system based on precision and obedience. Its digital yuan operated like a heartbeat inside a single organism, each pulse recorded, each flow monitored. To the Communist Party, this was not surveillance but stability. In a world of volatility, China offered order. And for developing nations weary of Western pressure, that promise was tempting. Lai was fast, reliable, and free from the political weight of the US dollar. Meanwhile, Bitcoin stood apart, neither east nor west, but everywhere at once. Miners in Texas and Kazakhstan, traders in Lagos and Sao Paulo, coders in Berlin and Seoul, all connected through a network that no one owned. It was chaotic, inefficient, and unstoppable. For the first time in history, value itself existed without a central authority, and that frightened everyone who had built their power on controlling it. Markets reacted like living creatures sensing a storm. Investors poured money into digital assets, fearing they might miss the next revolution. Traditional currencies swung violently as capital moved between systems. The International Monetary Fund warned of monetary fragmentation, but no one listened. Every nation was too busy securing its place in the new order. By the late 2020s, finance had split into three overlapping worlds. In one, regulated institutions continued to operate central banks, commercial lenders, and global corporations using digital dollars. In another, state-backed systems like China's Digital Yuan expanded through Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And beyond both, a borderless digital realm thrived: Bitcoin, decentralized finance, and tokenized economies running without permission. Money had become multilingual. This new landscape reshaped power itself. The dollar still ruled trade, but lost its monopoly on trust. The yuan ruled efficiency, but struggled for global legitimacy. Bitcoin ruled imagination, but lacked stability. Each system was incomplete on its own, yet together they defined the era. The world was no longer unipolar or bipolar. It had become tripolar, balanced on a fragile triangle of ideology: control, confidence, and code. Governments scrambled to adapt. United States strengthened alliances, linking its financial systems to digital trade networks. China expanded the Belt and Road Initiative to include digital currencies. Even the European Union launched the digital euro, hoping to carve a middle path democratic but disciplined. Globalization had not ended, it had evolved. For ordinary people, the change was invisible but absolute. Bank accounts turned into digital wallets, cash disappeared, artificial intelligence managed savings, credit, and taxes. Money became instant and intelligent, but also transparent. Every transaction left a footprint. Every purchase was data. Privacy faded into nostalgia. Economists began calling this new reality the algorithmic economy, a world where value moved at the speed of light, governed not by laws but by logic. National borders mattered less. Digital access mattered more. Wealth no longer flowed through geography, but through connectivity. Those with technology prospered, those without it became invisible. The philosophical divide deepened. Decentralization advocates claimed the future belonged to open code and self-sovereign identity. Regulators warned that without rules, society would collapse into digital anarchy. Both sides had evidence. Every innovation created opportunity and crisis. Every act of control created stability and resentment. The currency war was not just economic anymore. It was psychological. It reflected humanity's eternal tension between freedom and fear. As the decade ended, the world reached an uneasy balance. The dollar endured, but shared power with competitors. The yuan spread through trade and infrastructure. Bitcoin refused to die, surviving every ban, crash, and prediction of failure. Each force had found its role. Together they formed a system too complex for anyone to dominate and too interlinked for anyone to escape. Historians would later say the war never truly ended, transformed into a permanent negotiation, a global conversation about who should define value. Who should see our data, and who should decide what trust really means. In the end, money revealed its deepest truth. It has always been a mirror. It reflects what humanity fears, what it desires, and what it dares to believe. The next phase of the currency war won't be fought in markets, but in minds where the idea of trust without borders meets the instinct for control without limits. The human era, freedom, control, and the future of money by the early 2030s. The world had survived a decade of monetary transformation. The Great Currency War had not destroyed civilization, it had redefined it. Three forces now shaped the future: the dollar, the digital yuan, and Bitcoin. They no longer fought to eliminate each other. They competed to coexist. The war had become a balance of code, politics, and human choice. The United States still anchored the global economy with the dollar, but its dominance had changed in nature. No longer a symbol of unquestioned power, it became a bridge currency, connecting democratic allies and private digital networks. Transparency and technology replaced fear and force as the foundations of American influence. Washington had learned that leadership in the digital age required cooperation as much as control. China, in contrast, had achieved what it desired most: financial sovereignty. Its digital yuan circulated across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, integrated into trade, energy, and infrastructure. The system was fast, efficient, and deeply centralized. To Beijing, it represented harmony between state and citizen, order over chaos. To the rest of the world, it demonstrated that surveillance could be disguised as stability. The ECNY became both a triumph and a warning, a currency that obeyed perfectly but never forgot. And then there was Bitcoin, the wild, stateless child that refused to vanish. Every attempt to ban it only made it stronger. It survived crashes, regulations, and propaganda because it wasn't just technology, it was belief. It became the planet's first truly neutral asset, accepted from San Francisco to Lagos, from Mumbai to Buenos Aires. For millions of people in unstable economies, it wasn't speculation, it was survival, a digital lifeboat in a sea of political storms. Together, these three systems reshaped the world's understanding of value. The dollar represented trust in institutions. The yuan represented trust in authority. Bitcoin represented trust in mathematics. Each answered the same question differently. What do we believe in when everything becomes data? But the victory of technology came with a hidden cost: the erosion of privacy. Every transaction, every purchase, every heartbeat of economic life was recorded somewhere. People gained speed, access, and convenience, but lost in visibility. Freedom no longer meant doing what you wanted. It meant choosing which system watched you less. Governments adapted by forming new alliances. The global monetary grid connected national currencies, corporate tokens, and decentralized assets under shared standards. It promised transparency, but also created the largest data infrastructure in human history. Power had shifted from banks to algorithms, from central bankers to engineers. The people who wrote the code now held the keys to civilization. In this new world, identity and money became one. Digital wallets served as passports, credit histories, and personal archives. AI advisors managed investments and taxes. Charities, elections, and even social movements operated on blockchain systems. The dream of efficiency had become reality, and yet something felt missing. The system was intelligent but not wise. It could count everything except meaning. Philosophers began to ask whether humanity still controlled its own economy, or whether the economy now controlled humanity. Could people truly be free in a world where freedom itself was programmable? Some believe the answer lay in a new philosophy, a human-centered digital ethics, where technology served values, not the other way around. Developers started designing ethical blockchain systems that balanced transparency with privacy, growth with sustainability. For the first time, morality and mathematics shared the same space. By the end of the 2030s, the currency war had evolved into something else entirely. It was no longer about nations or numbers, it was about humans. The dollar endured, the yuan expanded, Bitcoin persisted, but the real revolution was cultural. People across the globe had learned to question what money truly meant. It was not just what they used, it was what they believed in. Historians would call this period the human era of finance. The moment when humanity realized that technology could reshape everything except its own nature. Because behind every transaction, every system, every algorithm, one thing still mattered most: trust. And trust could not be programmed. The next chapter of the currency war will not be about who controls the code, but who defines its purpose. Money, once a symbol of power, has become a reflection of choice. And in that reflection, we may finally see the oldest truth of all. That the future of finance has never been about currency, it has always been about people. The digital divide, humanity at the crossroads by the 2040s. The currency war had transformed the world into something unrecognizable. Borders still existed on maps, but not in money. Transactions flowed across invisible highways of data faster than thought, indifferent to nations. The dream of a unified digital economy had come true, but it came with a price no one had anticipated. Technology had made everything easier, and everyone more exposed. The digital dollar, the ECNY, and countless other currencies now operated seamlessly on global networks. But for every advantage gained, a fragment of humanity seemed to fade. The poor were connected but not protected. The rich were decentralized but untouchable. Money had become perfectly efficient but frighteningly unequal. In cities from New York to Shanghai, people no longer touched physical cash. They paid with fingerprints, voice scans, neural signatures. Artificial intelligence managed spending, predicted taxes, and even denied purchases based on algorithmic morality. Convenience had replaced privacy. Automation had replaced trust. For them, the promise of digital freedom had become another wall. The divide was no longer between rich and poor, but between plugged and unplugged. Governments called it progress. Corporations called it innovation. But for many, it felt like something else, a quiet loss of control over daily life. Every job, every loan, every opportunity depended on digital identity and data reputation. One error, one glitch, could erase a person's economic existence. Freedom had never been so conditional. In this new landscape, trust had become both abundant and extinct. Blockchains recorded every transaction. Truth was mathematically provable. Yet people trusted the system less than ever. They feared manipulation, surveillance, and the invisible hands behind the algorithms. Technology had made deceit harder, but power easier to hide. Amid the unease, a global movement began to rise. Developers, ethicists, and ordinary citizens demanded a new balance, one where technology served humanity, not the other way around. They called it the digital rights renaissance. It wasn't a rebellion of guns or protests, but of ideas. They argued that freedom in the digital age meant more than access. It meant agency, the right to choose how one's data, money, and identity were used. Across continents, people began to rewrite the social contract of the digital era. Nations responded differently. The United States promoted an open, regulated model, freedom through transparency. China emphasized collective stability, order through discipline. Europe sought harmony, privacy through design. No system was perfect, but each reflected its culture's deepest values. For the first time, technology mirrored humanity's diversity rather than suppressing it. Meanwhile, new generations grew up fluent in both code and conscience. They didn't see Bitcoin, dollars, or yuan as rivals, only tools. To them, value wasn't something printed or programmed. It was something chosen. They used decentralized apps to fund charities, build communities, and trade knowledge instead of money. For them, the currency war was history, a story their parents had lived through. They were building something beyond it. But the question remained, could technology ever truly balance freedom and control? Could a system designed to optimize efficiency ever protect the imperfect chaos of human nature? The answer was unclear, because for every breakthrough came new risks. Quantum computing threatened encryption. AI-generated markets manipulated prices faster than humans could react. The same intelligence that created abundance also created fragility. As the world entered the mid-century, humanity found itself standing at a crossroads. On one path lay a future of perfect order, clean, efficient, predictable, and soulless. On the other, a future of chaos, free, creative, but uncertain. Neither path led to peace. Both demanded compromise. And so, perhaps for the first time in history, civilization began to ask not how to win the currency war, but how to end it. Not by conquering markets or rewriting code, but by remembering what money was always meant to represent: trust between people. The battle that began with Trump's Bitcoin order and China's digital yuan had evolved into something larger, a test of what humanity valued most. In the end, the future of money would not be decided by governments or algorithms, but by the simple, timeless choice each person makes every day to trust or not to trust. Rebuilding trust, the age of ethical technology by the mid-21st century. Humanity had reached the end of the long digital storm. The currency war that began with the clash between Trump's Bitcoin order and China's digital yuan had reshaped every economy, every nation, and every life. But after decades of competition, exhaustion replaced ambition. The world no longer wanted domination. It wanted direction. The systems that once battled for supremacy, the dollar, the yuan, and Bitcoin, had matured into pillars of coexistence. The dollar still anchored global trade, but it had evolved, transparent, blockchain-based, and accountable. The digital yuan remained a monument to precision and state control, powering China's massive, data-driven economy. And Bitcoin, once dismissed as rebellion, had become a universal reference point, a decentralized standard for measuring trust. Three ideologies of money, each incomplete alone, now formed a fragile harmony. Out of that balance rose a new question: what should power serve? The answer came not from governments or banks, but from people. Across the planet, citizens demanded more than convenience or efficiency. They demanded conscience. The movement that began as scattered protests evolved into a philosophy: ethical technology, the belief that innovation must protect the dignity of life, not just the flow of capital. Developers began to design systems that encoded morality as carefully as they encoded mathematics. Smart contracts carried clauses for fairness, sustainability, and privacy. Digital currencies built environmental limits into their code, preventing excessive energy use. AI algorithms were trained not only to optimize profits but to preserve equality. Slowly, the architecture of finance began to reflect the architecture of values. Governments joined the transformation. The United States launched the Global Digital Ethics Act, requiring all financial AI to explain its decisions. China introduced harmony protocols, integrating social accountability into its economic algorithms. Europe led the creation of the Green Ledger, a blockchain dedicated to tracking environmental impact. For the first time, law, technology, and morality spoke the same language, code. The private sector followed. Corporations adopted transparent ledgers open to the public. Consumers could trace every product from resource to sale, every investment from profit to purpose. A new kind of capitalism emerged, not based solely on growth, but on responsibility. Shareholders measured success not only by returns, but by integrity. Education changed as well. Children learned economics and ethics side by side, coding and philosophy as a single subject. They were taught that technology is not neutral, that every algorithm reflects the intentions of its creator. In this new generation, the divide between coder and citizen disappeared. Everyone was both. The future was no longer being programmed for humanity, it was being programmed by it. Yet challenges remained. Automation displaced workers faster than new industries could absorb them. Quantum breakthroughs threatened cryptographic systems once thought unbreakable. And as always, power sought to centralize. But now society had something it lacked during the first currency war: awareness. People understood that every technological decision carried moral weight. Transparency had replaced ignorance. Accountability had replaced fear. Historians would later call this period the age of ethical technology, a time when civilization finally asked not just how to build, but why. Money ceased to be a symbol of control and became a language of cooperation. Nations competed not to dominate, but to innovate responsibly. And though the tension between freedom and order never vanished, humanity had learned to live within it, to treat balance itself as progress. By the end of the century, the old term currency war sounded archaic. The real battle had never been about dollars, yuan, or Bitcoin. It had been about meaning, the right to define value, the right to decide what is worth building, protecting, and believing in. As humanity looked toward the stars, planning economies that could extend beyond Earth, one truth endured. Trust, fragile, precious, human trust, remained the only currency that mattered. Everything else was just its reflection in code. Beyond money, the rise of a conscious economy by the middle of the 22nd century. The word currency had begun to lose its meaning. Humanity no longer lived in a world where value was printed or mined. It was generated by data, creativity, and collective intelligence. The war over money had ended, not with victory or defeat, but with evolution. What replaced it was something new, a conscious economy, driven not by fear of scarcity, but by awareness of connection. It began slowly, almost quietly. As artificial intelligence matured and quantum computing stabilized, the boundaries between economics, ethics, and ecology started to blur. Energy grids, logistics systems, and financial networks merged into one living web, a planetary infrastructure that measured not just production, but harmony. The currencies of the old world, dollars, yuan, and even Bitcoin, still existed. But they were now tools within a greater system, not masters of it. In this new era, value was measured in impact, not accumulation. Every transaction carried an ecological and social score. A payment for food reflected not only its price, but the carbon footprint of its journey. A business loan included metrics for community benefit and sustainability. Profit alone was no longer enough. Growth had to justify its existence in moral and environmental terms. Economics had evolved from numbers to narratives, from balance sheets to balance itself. Governments had transformed. The United States, China, and the European Union had long abandoned their rivalry over currency. Instead, they competed in cooperation, racing to pioneer new systems of resource equality, digital education, and ethical AI. International institutions had become algorithmic mediators, balancing the needs of humanity and the planet in real time. Decisions that once took months of negotiation were now modeled and simulated within seconds. For the first time, global governance was as fast as global trade. But even as technology brought efficiency, the real revolution was human. After centuries of crisis, economic collapse, climate upheaval, and social polarization, People had begun to seek meaning beyond consumption. Communities rediscovered local economies, digital cooperatives, and time-based currencies that rewarded contribution instead of extraction. Education no longer trained workers. It cultivated wisdom. The most valuable asset was no longer gold, data, or Bitcoin, it was understanding. The new generation, born into a world without cash or debt, grew up seeing value differently. They didn't ask how much is it worth, they asked how does it serve. Their digital wallets were filled not just with tokens of exchange, but with credentials of learning, creativity, and service. To them, economy and ecology were one word: the art of living in balance. Still, the transition was not perfect. Old instincts, greed, competition, and control never vanished completely. Some corporations tried to dominate this new order through algorithmic monopolies, using predictive AI to manipulate entire markets. But unlike the past, the system now had self-correcting ethics built into its code. Every abuse of power left a trace visible to all. Transparency became the ultimate regulator. In this age, money no longer dictated morality. Morality dictated money. Financial networks operated like ecosystems, adapting to sustain equilibrium rather than maximize profit. And when crises did occur, when a system failed or a community collapsed, global AI councils coordinated recovery automatically, distributing resources with precision unimaginable in the old world. Efficiency and empathy had finally learned to coexist. Looking back, historians describe the 21st century as the adolescence of civilization, a time when humanity learned what it could do, but not yet why it should. The currency wars, the digital divides, the rise of ethical technology, all had been growing pains of a species learning responsibility for its own creation. Money had been humanity's mirror. Now it had become its teacher. As the 22nd century unfolded, the question of who controls value gave way to a deeper one. What is value for? For knowledge, for beauty, for survival, or for the simple act of living wisely together? And in that question, humanity found peace. Because once the purpose of economy became consciousness itself, the war that had begun with competition ended with cooperation. The code that once divided nations now united minds. The technology that once enslaved became a tool for empathy. And the wealth humanity had been searching for all along: trust. Understanding and harmony had never been in its currencies. It had always been in its heart. The last algorithm, humanity's final currency, by the dawn of the 23rd century. The world had stopped asking who controlled money. The old questions about markets, currencies, and power no longer mattered. After centuries of evolution, humanity had finally built a system that governed itself. The economy had become conscious, and trust had become the only currency left. No one printed money anymore. Value emerged through collective intelligence, a vast network of humans and machines thinking together, balancing the needs of every community, every ecosystem in real time. What once began as blockchain had evolved into something far greater, a living algorithm woven through the fabric of civilization. It didn't rule, it reflected. It adjusted to human intention like a mirror adjusting to light. This network had no borders and no masters. It was neither capitalist nor socialist, neither east nor west. It was the sum of every decision humanity had ever made, transparent, adaptive, alive. Governments became coordinators, not controllers. Corporations became stewards, not owners. Every transaction was an act of participation, not domination. The currency war that had divided the planet for generations was now a distant memory. Studied in classrooms like an ancient myth, historians called this system the algorithm of trust. It had no central server, no headquarters, no ruler. It existed everywhere, encoded in billions of minds and machines. It learned, evolved, and remembered. But most importantly, it listened. It listened to the heartbeat of humanity, to the collective emotion that guided progress. Economics had finally caught up with ethics. In this new age, wealth was measured not by possession, but by contribution. To create value meant to create harmony. Artists, engineers, and educators shared equal recognition with scientists and entrepreneurs. Innovation was rewarded when it improved life, not just profit. For the first time in history, the invisible and the essential kindness, empathy, and understanding had measurable worth. Humanity had finally learned to invest in itself. The algorithm wasn't perfect, no system ever was. But it carried one rule that could never be altered. Every decision must increase collective awareness. Every transaction, no matter how small, was a lesson feeding back into the network, refining it, teaching it to serve better. In this way, the system didn't replace humanity. It amplified it. Technology had become not an escape from human nature, but an extension of it. Freedom, once defined by independence, was now understood as interdependence. Every person's well-being was connected to everyone else's. The illusion of separation, nations, borders, classes, had dissolved into data. Humans still disagreed, still struggled, still dreamed, but they no longer needed to fight over survival. Energy was abundant, resources balanced, and time, humanity's oldest scarcity, had finally been reclaimed. In this quiet equilibrium, the question arose, what comes after perfection? When money, politics, and technology all serve the same purpose, what remains for humanity to seek? The answer was the same as it had always been, meaning, even in an age of infinite abundance, the human heart still longed to create, to explore, to wonder. And so, civilization turned outward, toward the stars, carrying with it the final lesson of its own evolution, that consciousness, not currency, was the true measure of wealth. Has humanity prepared to expand beyond Earth? The algorithm of trust continued to hum softly in the background, guiding billions of interconnected minds like a cosmic pulse. Every planet settled, every colony built, would inherit the same principle that had saved its origin world: cooperation through understanding. The final legacy of the currency war was not conquest, but connection. And though no one remembered when the last coin was spent or the final blockchain mined, everyone still remembered why it all began, because humanity had once mistaken control for security and chaos for freedom, until it realized that both were necessary for balance. In the end, there was no last empire, no last bank, no last government, only the last algorithm, a self-sustaining rhythm of trust, compassion, and awareness. It was not human or machine, but the child of both. It did not command, it understood. And through that understanding, it gave humanity what no currency ever could: peace with itself. The war for money had become the journey for meaning. And that journey, eternal, unending, and alive, was the true wealth humanity had been searching for all along.